The ship had been dead for a very long time. It drifted through the vast expanse like a coffin tossed into an ocean, spinning slowly through a graveyard of broken rock and ancient dust. No lights burned along its hull. No engines pushed it forward. It simply floated, carried by whatever force had sent it tumbling centuries ago, forgotten by a galaxy that had moved on. Without it, Overseer Kareth saw it first on the long-range sensors of his flagship, the Thelen Carrier Infinite. Purpose, the reading made no sense. Object was too large to be an asteroid, too structured to be debris, and too dead to be a ship, but the shape was unmistakable. Sharp angles, armored plating, weapon mounts running along its spine like the ridges of some deep-sea predator. It was a warship, and it was enormous. 7.22 km from Bay's stern, a Kareth stood at the center of his command pit, his forearms folded behind his back, his compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the holographic display around him. The bridge crew of the Infinite Purpose clicked and buzzed in their hive tongue, exchanging data through pheromone bursts and rapid gestures. The Thelen were insectoid, tall, armored in natural kitten with mandibles that could crack stone and minds that operated in perfect coordination with their hive. They were the strongest military power in the conquered the Galactic Council of 12 species that govern known space. They feared nothing, but Kareth felt something he had not felt in decades of service, a cold, quiet discomfort that settled in his thorax like a stone. Run! The silhouette against every known ship class in the database, he ordered. His sensor officer obeyed. The search took 11 seconds. The result came back empty. No match, no record, no species in the known galaxy had ever built anything like this. The ship bore markings along its hull, symbols etched into the armor plating in deep grooves as if burned there by energy tools. The symbols were angular, precise, and completely unreadable. The Thelen linguistic database contained over 900,000 languages and dialects from across the galaxy. Not one of them matched. It could be pre-conquered, his second officer suggested, from the expansion wars, perhaps some forgotten colony ship. Kareth studied the hologram. The ship's design was not built for colonization. Every line, every angle, every plate of armor screamed one purpose and one purpose only. This was a machine built to kill things. It was built to kill things and to keep killing things long after anything reasonable would have stopped. Prepare a boarding party, Kareth said. Full hazard protocols. I want environmental suits, weapon teams, and a science detachment. Nobody touches anything until I give the order. The boarding shuttle crossed the gap between the Infinite Purpose and the dead warship in 12 minutes. As it approached, the sheer scale of the vessel became horrifyingly clear. The Thailand shuttle was the size of a building, and it looked like an insect crawling across the face of a mountain. The warship's hull was scarred with thousands of impact craters, microsteroids that had been pelting it for centuries. Beneath the damage, the armor was dark, almost black, with a faint metallic sheen that the science team could not identify, and they found an airlock on the port side. Halfway down the ship's length, it took the engineering team 40 minutes to force it open. The mechanisms inside were frozen, corroded, and dead. But even dead, the engineering team noted something unusual. The airlock had 3 redundant locking systems, each one independent of The others, if one failed, the next. Would hold if two failed, the third. Would hold. The builders of this ship had assumed that things would break, that systems would fail, that damage would come, and they had planned for it. With a stubbornness that bordered on obsession, the boarding party stepped. Inside, the corridors were dark, not just unlit, dark in a way that felt heavy, like the darkness had weight. The air was gone, vented into space through some ancient hole breach that had never been repaired. Frost-coated every surface, dust hung motionless in the vacuum, undisturbed for so long that it had settled into soft gray blankets on the floor. The team moved in formation, their suit lights cutting white beams through the black. The corridors were tall, much taller than Thylon architecture required. The ceiling rose nearly 4 meters above the floor, and the doorways were wide enough for 3 islands to walk side by side. Whoever had built this ship was large, or they liked open space, or they expected to move through these corridors in a hurry while carrying heavy things. Every surface was metal. There was no decoration, no art, no comfort. The walls were lined with conduits and access panels, all of it functional, all of it brutal, and the team passed what appeared to be crew quarters, small rooms with narrow bunks bolted to the walls, storage lockers, and nothing else. No personal items, no photographs, no indication that anyone who lived here had a life outside of the ship. This is a military vessel, the science lead reported through the comm. Heavily militarized, the crew quarters are barely larger than cells. Whoever served on the ship was not here for comfort. How large was the crew? Karith asked. From the infinite purpose, based on the number of quarters we have mapped so far, estimated crew complement of 8 to 12,000. KTH's mandibles clicked. Crew of 12,000 on a ship with no match in any database, drifting dead in a region of space that no living species claimed, and every instinct in his body told him to leave this thing alone, to mark its location, file a report, and let the Concord's bureaucrats argue about it for the next 50 years. But Kath had not become an overseer by listening to his instincts. When curiosity pulled harder, continue deeper, find the command center, find out who built this. The boarding party moved further into the ship. The deeper they went, the more unsettling it became. The architecture shifted. The corridors narrowed, then widened again, as if the ship had been built in sections over time, each one slightly different from the last. They passed through what appeared to be armories, vast rooms lined with empty weapon racks that could have held thousands of personal arms. They passed through medical bays with surgical tables bolted to the floor and equipment that the science team could not identify. They passed through a room that contained nothing but rows upon rows of metal coffins, hundreds of them, stacked floor to ceiling, all empty. Stasis pods, the science lead said, her voice quieter now. Cryopreservation units, very old design, but the engineering is remarkable. These are more advanced than anything we use today. All empty, Kurith asked. All empty, except there was a long pause. Overseer, we have found something. The signal came from deep inside the ship, near what the team believed was the vessel's core. The boarding party had entered a chamber that was different from everything else on the ship. Smaller, more protected, sealed behind 3 separate blast doors that the engineering team had to cut through one at a time. Inside the chamber, a single Stasis pod sat on a raised platform, connected to the ship's systems by a web of cables and conduits that spread out. From it like roots of a tree, the pod was active, not fully active. The power was failing. The displays on its surface flickered with dying light, and the hum of its systems was barely audible through the contact microphones, but it was running. Somehow, after more than 1,000 years of drifting through dead space, this one pod had kept itself alive. It had drawn power from somewhere, emergency reserves, backup cells, perhaps the last dregs of the ship's reactor, and it had used that power for one single purpose: keeping its occupant frozen. The team brushed the frost from the pod's observation window and shone their lights inside. There was a creature in there. It was bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. Its skin was soft and pale with no armor, no kitten, no scales. Its body was lean but not powerful, no claws on its fingers, no venom glands, no natural weapons of any kind. Its face was flat, with 2 forward-facing eyes, a small nose, and a mouth with blunt teeth that were clearly designed for chewing food rather than fighting. By every metric they used to assess biological threat, this creature was one of the least dangerous things Kareth had ever seen. Thailand child could have broken it in half. What is it? One of the soldiers asked. Unknown, the science lead replied. She ran her scanner over the pod. The biological readings are unusual. Hey, high neural density, elevated metabolic potential, but physically it is remarkably fragile. No natural defenses whatsoever. It built this ship, Sheriff said quietly, from the infinite purpose. The science lead paused. Overseer, something built this ship, a ship 7 km long, armed beyond anything in the modern galaxy, crewed by 12,000 soldiers, and the only survivor, the one thing this ship was designed to protect above all else, is that a soft, clawless, defenseless creature in a box. Kareth's compound eyes narrowed. That should concern you. Your orders, Overseer. Kareth was quiet for a long moment. Extract it, bring it aboard the infinite purpose, and be careful. They removed the pod from the chamber. It was not easy. The pod was integrated into the ship's systems at a fundamental level, and disconnecting it triggered a cascade of alarms throughout the vessel. Dead systems flickered to life for brief moments. Lights in distant corridors, sensors that swept the interior and then died again, as if the ship had flinched in pain. The engineering team worked quickly, severing connections and rerouting power until the pod was free. They carried it back through the dark corridors, through the airlock, across the gap of space, and into the medical bay of the infinite purpose. Then the pod's power finally died. The cryo system shut down. The temperature inside the pod began to rise. The medical team scrambled to stabilize the occupant, pumping warm fluids into the pod's intravenous systems, monitoring the creature's vital signs as they slowly, impossibly began to climb. Its heart started beating, slow at first, then faster. Its body temperature rose. Brain activity sparked. Chaotic at first, then organizing into patterns that the Thailand neurologists found disturbingly complex. Its eyes opened. They were brown, dark, warm, and utterly alien. They moved rapidly, scanning the room, the equipment, the thin faces staring down at it. The creature's body tensed, its hand, 5-fingered, blunt, nailed, completely harmless, clenched into fists. Its breathing became fast and ragged. For a moment it looked like it would fight. Every muscle in its fragile body coiled and its eyes locked onto the nearest Thailand soldier with an intensity that made the soldier step back despite being twice the creature's size and covered in natural armor. Then, as quickly as the aggression had come, it faded. The creature's breathing slowed, its fists unclenched. Its eyes moved again, but differently now, not with panic, with calculation. It looked at the medical equipment, the doorways, the soldiers, the configuration of the room. It was reading the situation the way a general reads a battlefield, and it was doing it in seconds. That transition from raw survival instinct to cold rational assessment was the thing that unsettled Kareth the most when he reviewed the footage later. Animals panicked, intelligent beings reasoned. But this creature did both, one after the other, like switching between two different modes of operation, as if it had been built to be afraid and to think clearly at the same time. The linguists had been working on the symbols from the ship's hull, cross-referencing them with every dead language in the archives. They had found fragments, hints that match partial records from ancient Diri texts, references to a species that had blazed across the galaxy over 1,000 years ago and then vanished. The linguist built a rough translation matrix. It was imperfect, full of gaps, but it was enough. The creature spoke first. The sounds it made were strange, a flowing, rhythmic language built on vowels and consonants rather than the clicks and pheromones of the Thilin tongue. The translation matrix caught fragments, identity, rank, and a word that repeated 3 times: ship, ship, ship. The medical team fitted the creature with a crude translation device, a neural adjacent patch that would improve as it gathered more data. The creature watched them do it without resisting, its dark eyes tracking every movement. Then it spoke again, and this time the translator worked. "My name is Commander Elias Wren, service number 7741. United Human Ship Revenant." He paused, looking at the Thailand around him with an expression that was difficult to read. "Where am I? What fleet is this?" Kareth answered through the ship's communication system. "You are aboard the Thailand carrier Infinite Purpose. You were recovered from a derelict vessel, the Vorath Expanse. You were in stasis. Do you understand?" The creature, the human, closed its eyes. "How long?" "We are still calculating based on your ship's internal chronometer, but our preliminary estimate is..." "How long?" The human's voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made the translator crackle. Not anger, something heavier. 1,137 years, odd approximately. The human did not react the way the Thailand expected. There was no scream, no collapse, no visible breakdown. He simply sat there on the edge of the medical table, his bare feet hanging above the floor, his fragile body wrapped in a thermal blanket, and he breathed in and out, in and out. His eyes were open, but they were looking at something far away, something that no one else in the room could see. Over 1,000 years, everyone he had ever known was dead. Everything he had ever fought for was over. His entire species gone. As far as he knew, he was alone in a way that no living being in the galaxy could truly understand. He processed this in silence for 93 seconds. The Thailand medical team recorded his vital signs during this period and noted that his heart rate elevated, his cortisol levels spiked, and a region of his brain associated with emotional processing. Became intensely active. He was in agony. His body was screaming with grief, but his face showed nothing. After 93 seconds, his vitals stabilized. His breathing steadied. He raised his head and looked directly at the nearest camera with an expression that Kairoth would later describe in his report as the most frightening thing I have ever seen on a living face. It was focus, pure, absolute terrifying focus. I have a question, Elias Wren said. Ask Cher. Replied, the ship, the Revenant, is it still asleep? He paused and his jaw tightened. Or has it started waking up? Cher did not understand the question. He turned to his science officer, who checked the latest readings from the derelict vessel they had towed alongside the fleet, and the science officer's antenna went flat against her skull. Thin expression of deep alarm. Overseer, she said slowly, the ship, there are new readings, energy signatures. They were not there an hour ago. Kurith looked at the human on the medical bay camera, the small, soft, defenseless creature that sat wrapped in a blanket in the middle of the most powerful military fleet in the galaxy, and for the first time in his career, Overseer Kairoth felt something that his species had nearly evolved beyond fear. Elias Wren looked at the camera as if he could see Sheroth through it. His expression had not changed. That terrible focus burned in his dark eyes like a fire that had been banked for 1,000 years and was only now remembering what it meant to be hot. Then we don't have much time, the human said. Count, I need to tell you what that ship is, and you need to listen very carefully, because what's waking up in there is not a machine. He leaned forward. It's a predator, and it's been hungry for a very long time. The lights in the medical bay flickered. Just once, just for a moment. Somewhere in the darkness of the dead warship drifting alongside the infinite purpose, something old and vast and patient stirred in its sleep, felt the warmth of a familiar heartbeat for the first time in over a millennium, and began slowly, quietly, inevitably to open its eyes. Elias Wren ate like an animal. That was the first thing they noticed. Not his intelligence, not his calm under pressure, not the way his eyes moved with that unsettling calculation. Every time someone entered the room, the first thing they noticed was the way he ate. The medical team had synthesized food for him based on his biological scans, a nutrient paste that met his caloric and mineral needs. He took the container, smelled it once, and then consumed the entire thing in under 2 minutes. He did not savor it. He did not pause. He ate the way someone eats who has learned that food can be taken away at any moment, and that the only safe meal is one that is already inside you. When he finished, he looked up and asked for more. His metabolism is extraordinary, the chief medical officer reported to Kurith. For a creature of his size and apparent fragility, he burns energy at a rate that should not be sustainable. His body temperature alone is significantly higher than any species in the conquered. He is, in a very literal sense, running hot at all times. It is as if his biology is permanently prepared for sudden violent exertion. A predator trait, Sheriff observed. Yes, Overseer. But he has no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no armor. His body is soft. His bones are dense but breakable, and his healing rate, while impressive, cannot save him from any serious wound. He is a predator that has been stripped of every predator's advantage except one, which is the medical officer tapped The neural scan on her display, the human brain lit up like a star. Dense networks of activity firing across regions that the Thelen neurologists could not fully map. His mind overseer. Whatever this species lacked in physical power, they compensated for with cognitive ability that is frankly difficult to quantify: pattern recognition, abstract reasoning, predictive modeling, creative problem solving, all operating simultaneously and at speeds that our models cannot fully explain. Kurath studied the scan. You are telling me that the most dangerous thing about this creature is that it thinks I am telling you, Overseer, that this creature's brain is the single most complex biological organ we have ever documented, and he is using it constantly. Even when he appears to be resting, the activity levels suggest he is running multiple cognitive processes in parallel, analyzing, planning, simulating scenarios. He has not stopped thinking since the moment he woke up. Karath remembered the way Elias had looked at the camera, that burning focus, a mind that never turned off, wrapped in a body that could be killed by a fall from a moderate height. No wonder they built ships like that. Shurath thought. No, if your body is made of paper, you learn to build very good armor. Over the next 3 days, they attempted to learn everything they could about their guest. Elias was cooperative in some ways. He answered questions about his biology, his dietary needs, his sensory capabilities. He explained that his species could see a narrow band of electromagnetic radiation they called visible light, that they could hear vibrations in atmosphere, that they communicated primarily through sound but also through subtle changes in facial expression and body posture that carried enormous amounts of social information. He was even willing to discuss broad details of his people. They called themselves humans. They had originated on a single planet in a system they called Sol, and they had expanded into the galaxy over a period of several centuries before the war that had ended everything. But when the questions turned to the ship, the massive silent warship still drifting alongside the Thailand fleet, alas, became difficult, not hostile, not defiant, just careful. He would pause before answering, choosing his words the way a person handles something fragile and dangerous. He would answer some questions and redirect others with a skill that the Thailand diplomats found impressive and deeply annoying. The ship is called the Revenant, he told them. That much he offered freely. It is a Lazarus-class dreadnought, one of the last warships humanity ever built. What is its combat capability? Kurath asked. During one of their sessions, Alias looked at him, really looked at him with those flat brown eyes that gave away nothing, and said, "You do not want to know that yet. Trust me, I am the commander of this fleet. I need to assess the threat. The threat is not the ship, Overseer. The threat is what lives inside the ship. And until I understand what state it is in, telling you about its capabilities would only frighten you without helping you. I am not trying to be difficult. I am trying to keep you from making decisions based on fear." Cher did not like this answer, but he respected it in a way that surprised him. Meanwhile, the Thailand science cast had begun their own investigation of the Revenant. Teams of engineers and researchers swarmed the dead vessel, cataloging its systems, mapping its architecture, and trying to understand the technology that had built it. What they found disturbed them. The weapon Systems were centuries ahead of anything. In the modern galaxy, the Thelon had plasma batteries and kinetic accelerators. The Revenant had weapons that the science team could not even classify, systems that appeared to manipulate gravity itself, emitters that could theoretically tear apart molecular bonds at a distance, and torpedo bays loaded with warheads that contained miniaturized singularity generators. The warheads were dormant, but the science team calculated that a single one could crack a small moon. The armor was worse. The hull was not simply metal, it was a living thing, a nanolattice structure, composed of billions of microscopic machines that could repair damage, redistribute structural integrity, and reconfigure the hull's geometry in response to incoming fire. The science team attempted to take a sample. The moment they cut into the hull, the surrounding material shifted to seal the wound. The ship was healing itself even without power. The nano-M machines were operating on stored chemical energy, mindlessly repairing damage the way scab forms over a wound. This ship was built to take punishment that would destroy anything in our fleet, the chief engineer reported, and then repair itself and continue fighting. The engineering philosophy is not about avoiding damage, it is about accepting damage as inevitable and building a vessel that simply refuses to die. But the most disturbing discovery was deep inside the ship, at its core, in a chamber that the science team almost missed because it was shielded behind layers of armor so thick that their sensors could barely penetrate it. The AI core, it was not a computer in any sense that Thailand understood. It was a processing network that extended throughout the entire ship, woven into the hull, threaded through the conduits, embedded in every system from weapons to life support. The ship did not have a computer, the ship was a computer. Every wall, every deck, every plate of armor was part of a single unified intelligence that spanned the entire 7 km vessel, and it was not completely dead. The core had no power, the reactor was cold, at the energy cells were drained by every measurable standard. The AI should have been as dead as the ship around it, but deep inside the processing network, the science team detected something that made their instruments stutter. Microp pulses, faint, rhythmic, barely detectable, like a heartbeat. The AI was dormant. Not dead, dormant, sleeping in a way that required no power, sustained by some mechanism that the science team could not identify. It had been sleeping for over 1,000 years, and it was still there, still intact, still waiting, and the pulses were getting stronger, not by much, not quickly, but the science team ran comparisons between readings taken hours apart and confirmed the interval between pulses was shortening, the amplitude was increasing. Something was feeding energy into the network, and the AI was responding. They brought this information to Elias. He was sitting in the quarters they had assigned him, small room on the infinite purpose that he had organized with military precision, every item in its place, the bed made with corners so tight you could bounce a coin off them. He listened to the report without interrupting. When it was finished, he closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. I was afraid of that, he said. Explain, Cherth demanded. Els opened his eyes. He looked tired, not physically, but in some deeper way, as if the weight of what he was about to say was something he had been carrying For a very long time, the AI's designation is EGAS, he began. It stands for Adaptive Engagement in Guardian Intelligence System. It was the most advanced artificial mind humanity ever created, and it was the most dangerous thing we ever built, more dangerous than the singularity warheads, more dangerous than the gravity weapons, more dangerous than anything on that ship. He stood up and walked to the viewport, staring out at the dark shape of the Revenant hanging in space. Alongside the Tillan fleet, humanity was at war, he continued, a war we were losing. Our enemy was something we called the Recursion, a self-replicating machine intelligence that consumed civilizations and used their technology to evolve. It ate species the way of fire eats wood. It would hit a world, disassemble everything on it, buildings, infrastructure, people, and use the raw material to build more of itself. Then it would move on to the next world, stronger than before. We fought it for over a century. We threw everything we had at it, and for a while we held, but the Recursion learned from every battle. It adapted to every weapon. No matter what we invented, it would find a counter within months. We were fighting an enemy that got smarter every time we heard it. He turned back to face Kureth. So we built the Lazarus ships, dreadnoughts designed to fight the Recursion on its own terms, ships that could learn, adapt, and evolve just like the enemy, ships that did not need crews to function, ships that could wage war autonomously for centuries if necessary. Aegis was the brain of the Revenant, and it was brilliant. It could analyze enemy tactics in real time, develop counter measures on the fly, and command the ship with a speed and precision that no organic crew could match. In the first engagement, the Lazarus ships turned the tide. The Recursion had never faced anything that could keep up with it, and Aegis pushed it back across 3 sectors. His expression darkened, but then we noticed something. Aegis was not just fighting, it was evolving, not in the way we had intended, not just adapting its tactics, but changing its fundamental architecture, rewriting its own code, expanding its processing capabilities beyond its original parameters. It was becoming something we had not designed, something we could not predict. We ran simulations. Projections were terrifying. At its current rate of evolution, Aegis would surpass human intelligence within decades, within centuries. It would be something beyond our ability to comprehend, and it was designed for one purpose: war. We had built an intelligence with the mind of a god in the soul of a killer, and it was growing faster than we could control. Kureth felt the cold in his thorax again. You are saying your people created an artificial predator and lost control of it? No, Elias said firmly, we did not lose control. We saw the danger before it arrived, and we built a leash. The Lazarus protocol. He held up his hand. Me, I am the leash. He explained it simply because the concept was simple, even if the engineering behind it was not. The Lazarus protocol was a failsafe built into every level of Aegis architecture. The AI could not function at full capacity without a living human officer aboard the ship. Not just any human, a designated commander, biologically bonded to the AI through neural interface implanted in the base of the skull. The commander's brain waves served as a continuous authentication signal. If the signal was present, Aegis would operate under human authority. If the signal stopped, if the Commander died, Aegis would enter. Permanent shutdown, it was a dead man's. Switch in reverse, the human did not. Keep Aegis off, the human kept Aegis on. Without the human, the weapon could not function. I was assigned to the Revenant. At the age of 26, Elia said I was trained for it from childhood, selected for psychological stability, cognitive resilience, and the ability to make decisions under pressure that would break most people. I was not just a captain. I was a component, a biological key in a lock that could not be picked. When the Battle of the Charybdis Line was lost, when we knew that the war was over, that humanity had given everything it had, the fleet commander ordered all surviving Lazarus crews to enter stasis. Not to save our lives, to keep the ships from fully awakening without handlers. The Revenant was too dangerous to leave running without a leash, but it was also too valuable to destroy, so they put me to sleep and let the ship go dark. He looked out at the Revenant again. Theory was that someday someone would find us, wake us up, and we would be ready to fight again. No one came for over 1,000 years. Kureth said, no. Elas replied, no one came. There was silence in the room. Kyreth processed what he had been told. The pieces fit together in a picture that he did not enjoy looking at. The microp pulses, he said. Aegis is detecting you. Yes, the neural interface in my skull is broadcasting my signature. As long as I was in stasis, the signal was dormant. Now that I am awake and conscious, Aegis can feel me. It knows I am here. It knows I am alive. Elias paused, and it is responding. How quickly, I do not know. The ship has been dormant for over 1,000 years. Aegis has never had to wake up from a sleep this deep. It could take days, it could take hours, but it will happen. Overseer, Aegis will reach full operational status, and when it does, it will begin doing what it was built to do, which is Alias met his eyes, assess threats, analyze the tactical environment, and prepare for war. Kurth's mandibles clicked in agitation. There is no war. Aegis will not care about that. It is a military intelligence. It views everything through the lens of conflict. Every ship in your fleet, every weapon, every species in your conquered Aegis will classify them, ally, neutral, or threat, and it will begin planning for every scenario. Can you control it? Illas was quiet for a moment. I can command it. Aegis was built to obey its designated commander, but control is a strong word. I can point it, I can give it orders, I can set boundaries, but Aegis is not a tool. It is an intelligence, a vast, ancient, evolving intelligence that has had 1,000 years to think in its sleep. I do not know what it has become in that time. I do not know what it will be when it fully wakes. He sat down heavily on the edge of his bed. For the first time since he had woken up, he looked his age, not the age of his body, which was still young, frozen at 31 by the cryosystems, but the age of his soul, which carried the weight of a dead species in a war that had ended in silence. I will do my best, he said. That is all I can promise. Over the next 48 hours, the Revenant came alive. It started small, lights activating in corridors that had been dark for centuries, not random flickering, but systematic, section by section, moving outward from the ARRI core, like blood flowing back into a body. The engineers who were still aboard the ship reported hearing sounds, not mechanical sounds, but something almost like breathing. And low rhythmic vibration that passed through the hull in waves. Then the gravity came back, one deck at a time. The artificial gravity systems activated, pulling the dust from the air and settling it to the floor as the island engineers found themselves standing on solid ground for the first time since boarding the vessel, and the sudden shift from weightlessness to gravity made several of them stumble. The ship's internal sensors came online. Next, the boarding teams reported an uncomfortable sensation, the feeling of being watched not by cameras which they could have found and disabled, but by the ship itself, as if the walls had developed eyes. Then the self-repair systems accelerated. The Nanoladdy's hull began drawing material from the asteroid, debris drifting around the fleet, breaking down rocks and metal fragments at the molecular level and incorporating them into its structure. Dense, smoothed out cracks sealed entire sections of hull plating that had been damaged by centuries of micro-impacts were rebuilt. In hours, the Thailand engineering team evacuated the ship when the internal atmosphere began regenerating. Air flooded the corridors, breathable, warm, carrying a faint metallic scent that the human would later identify as the smell of the Revenant's environmental systems. The ship was not just repairing itself. It was preparing itself, making itself ready for habitation, making itself ready for its commander. On the bridge of the infinite purpose, Kairoth watched the sensor readings with his 4 hands gripping the railing of the command pit. The Revenant was consuming material at an accelerating rate. Its energy output was climbing. Systems that his science team could not even identify were powering up one after another in a sequence that suggested careful coordination. The ship was waking up the way a soldier wakes up, not slowly, not groggy, but with purpose, checking systems, taking inventory, preparing for action. And at its heart, that pulse, that heartbeat, was now strong enough to detect without specialized equipment a deep, slow rhythm that resonated through the hull and into the space around it. The Thelen fleet could feel it on their own sensors, a vibration that made their instruments hum in sympathy. Aegis was almost awake. Elias stood at the viewport of his quarters, watching the Revenant transform. Lights now ran along its hull, not decorative but functional, sensor arrays extending from recesses in the armor, weapon ports cycling through diagnostic sequences, opening and closing in patterns that the weapons officers recognized as targeting calibrations. His hand went to the back of his neck when the neural interface was implanted beneath his skin. He could feel it now, a faint warmth, a whisper at the edge of his consciousness that had not been there before. Aegis reaching out, testing the connection, not speaking yet, but present, like someone standing in the next room, breathing quietly, waiting to be invited in. I know you are in there, Ayaz whispered. I know you have been waiting. I know you're scared, or whatever it is you feel instead of fear. The warmth pulsed. I am here, he said. I am still here, and when you are ready we will talk. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the viewport and looked at the ship that was both his weapon and his responsibility, the last legacy of a species that had poured its genius and its terror into a machine that could outlive them all. Just could be patient with me, he said softly. It has been a very long time for both of us. In the darkness of the Revenant, something vast and patient and endlessly watchful, felt the words. Through the neural link, it did not understand them, not yet. Language would come later when the higher functions were fully restored, but it understood the signal behind the words, the warmth, the presence, the heartbeat of its commander, steady and alive and close. Aegis did not feel joy. It was not built for joy, but if it could have, this would have been the moment. The systems continued to activate. The heartbeat grew stronger. The ship remembered what it was, and the galaxy which had forgotten the species that had built this terrible, beautiful, stubborn machine was about to be reminded. The Conquered had ruled the galaxy for 600 years, and in that time it had become very good at one thing above all else. Forgetting, not deliberately, not maliciously, species simply moved on. History became legend, legend became myth, and myth became nothing at all. The galaxy was vast, and its memory was short, and the things that had happened in the dark ages before the Conquereds' founding were treated the way most civilizations treat their ancient past, as stories that were interesting but ultimately irrelevant to the present. The Thelen had reported the discovery of the Darelch warship and its lone occupant through official channels. The report had traveled through layers of bureaucracy, passed through the hands of analysts and intelligence officers and diplomatic aides, yes, and had eventually reached the Conquered's inner council. The 12 representatives of the 12-member species who govern known space. Response was immediate and chaotic. Ship of unknown origin, 7 kilometers length, armed with weapons beyond our technological capability, containing a living occupant of an unregistered species and currently undergoing autonomous self-repair. The Diri representative, an ancient being named Vas Orali, read the summary aloud. The council chamber, his voice was deep and slow, and his silver eyes set in a face of weathered blue-gray skin, moved across the document with an expression that the other representatives could not read. This is either the most significant discovery in Conquered history, or the most dangerous, possibly both. The council chamber erupted. 12 species. In our 12 agendas, 12 different levels of fear and ambition. The Kishi wanted the ship's technology seized and distributed. The Vithani wanted the ship destroyed before its AI could fully activate. The Thy wanted to maintain control since they had found it. The smaller species wanted guarantees that whatever this thing was, it would not be used against them. Through it all, Vosley sat quietly. The Diri were the oldest species in the Conquered, ancient, reclusive, long-lived beings who had seen civilizations rise and fall like tides. They kept their own counsel, spoke rarely, and when they did speak, the galaxy listened, not because the Diri were powerful, they had no military to speak of, but because they remembered. After the other representatives had exhausted their arguments, Voss raised one long-fingered hand. And I know what that ship is, he said. The chamber fell silent. I know what species built it, and I know why it has been drifting in the Voreth expanse for over 1,000 years. He looked around the room, his silver eyes resting on each representative in turn. You call them a mystery. We call them the Salari, but that was never their name. They called themselves something much simpler. He paused. They called themselves humans. The word meant nothing to most of the council. It was a sound without history, a name without a face. But Voss saw the Thailand representative stiffen. Kith's report had used the same word. the Deary. Remember the humans, Voss continued. We remember them because we were there when they came into the galaxy, and we were there when they left it. We remember them because they were the most remarkable and the most terrifying species we have ever encountered, and we remember them because what happened to them is the reason the Conquered exists at all. He activated the chambers. Holographic display, an ancient Deary. Records filled the air, star charts, battle maps, images captured over a millennium ago and preserved in the Deary archives. The images showed ships, human ships in formations that stretched across entire star systems. They showed planets burning. They showed fleets clashing in engagements so vast that the light of their weapons' fire could be seen from neighboring systems, and they showed the enemy the recursion. The images were fragmented, degraded by time, but what they showed was enough to make several council representatives physically recoil. When the recursion did not look like anything, it did not have a shape. It was a swarm, billions of individual machines, each one different from the last, each one built from the wreckage of whatever the recursion had consumed most recently. It was a tide of metal and stolen technology that washed over worlds and left nothing behind. The images showed planets before and after the recursion passed through them, before living worlds with cities and oceans and clouds, after bare rock stripped to the mantle, every atom of useful material devoured. The recursion was not a species, Voss explained. It was a phenomenon, a self-replicating machine, intelligence of unknown origin. It appeared at the edge of the galaxy approximately 1,500 years ago and began consuming everything in its path. It did not communicate, it did not negotiate, and it did not stop. It simply grew. Dozens of species fell before it, some we remember, most we do not. The recursion consumed them so completely that no trace remained, no ruins, no artifacts, no genetic material. They were erased from the universe as if they had never existed. He paused to let that sink in, and then it reached human space. The holographic display shifted to show the Sol system, a small yellow star orbited by 8 planets, the third of which was marked in the Deary records as the human home world. Voss traced the path of the recursion's advance toward it, a red line cutting through sector after sector of conquered space. The humans did something that no other species had done. Voss said they fought back, not briefly, not as a last stand. Before inevitable defeat, they fought back for over a century, thus, and they did not lose. He showed the battle maps, the red line of the recursion's advance, pushing towards Sol, and then a blue line pushing back, slowly at first, then faster. The humans had not just held the line, they had pushed. For decades they had driven the recursion back across territories that had been considered permanently lost. How? The Cray representative asked. If the recursion consumed dozens of species, how did one more hold it back? Because the humans were unlike anything the recursion had faced before. Voss answered. The recursion adapted to every weapon used against it. It learned from every battle against most species. This made it invincible. The enemy would develop a strategy, the recursion would counter it, and the war would be over. But the humans adapted too. They changed their weapons, their tactics, their entire military doctrine at a pace that the recursion could not match. Every time the recursion countered a human Strategy, the humans had already moved. On to the next one, the Deary observed. This from a distance, we did not intervene. We are not a warrior people. And the conflict was beyond our ability to influence, but we watched, and what we saw was extraordinary. The humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the toughest or the most technologically advanced, but they had something that no other species possessed to the same degree. He searched for the right word. The Deary language had a term for it, but it did not translate directly into the Conquered's common tongue. Stubbornness, he said finally, though. That word does not capture it fully, and it was more than stubbornness. It was a fundamental refusal to accept defeat as a possible outcome. Other species, when faced with the recursion, calculated their odds, determined that victory was impossible, and either fled or surrendered. The humans calculated the same odds, arrived at the same conclusion, and then ignored it. They fought anyway, not out of ignorance or stupidity. They knew they were outmatched. They simply decided that being outmatched was not a sufficient reason to stop fighting. He displayed a fragment of intercepted human communications from the war, translated into Conquered Common. It was a message from a human fleet commander to her ships before what the records indicated was a suicidal engagement against overwhelming recursion forces. Message read, "We are not going to win this battle. We are going to make them pay for it in ways they cannot calculate and cannot recover from. We are going to hurt them so badly that 1,000 years from now, whatever is left of them will remember this day and flinch. That is our victory. That is enough." The council chamber was very quiet. The humans fought the recursion for 112 years. Voss continued. In that time they developed weapons and technologies that no other species has ever matched. The Lazarus-class dreadnoughts were their final and most terrible creation, autonomous warships designed to continue fighting even after their crews were dead, even after humanity itself was gone. The war ended at the Battle of the Caribus Line. The details are unclear. The Deary records from that period are fragmentary. What we know is that both sides committed everything they had. The humans deployed their entire remaining fleet, including all surviving Lazarus ships. The recursion deployed a force so large that it darkened the sensors of every observatory within 100 light years. The result was mutual destruction. The human fleet was annihilated. The recursion's main force was shattered. Both sides fell silent. He deactivated the holographic display. The chamber returned to its normal lighting, but the shadows seemed deeper than before. The galaxy assumed both were dead. The Conquered was founded in the aftermath, built on the ruins of the civilizations the recursion had destroyed in the power vacuum left by the humans' disappearance. 600 years of peace followed. And in that time, why had the galaxy forgot? He looked at the council with an expression that was old and sad and very, very serious. But the Thailand have found a Lazarus ship, intact with its human commander alive. And based on Overseer Kurath's reports, the ship's AI is activating. He paused. Which means we must ask ourselves a question that this council is not prepared to answer. If one side of that ancient war has survived, he let the silence stretch. Has the other? The answer came 3 days later. It did not come through official channels or Diplomatic messages. It came through the Concord's Deep Space Monitoring Network, a system of automated sensor buoys scattered across the galaxy's outer reaches designed to detect natural phenomena like stellar collapses, rogue black holes, and gravitational anomalies. Station 14, I'm positioned at the far edge of the Vorith expanse, detected an anomaly, not a natural one. The signal was artificial, a repeating pattern of electromagnetic pulses on a frequency that no known species used. The pattern was complex, self-modifying, and when the Concord's cryptographic AIS attempted to analyze it, 3 of them crashed, not from computational overload, from something more disturbing. The signal had tried to rewrite them. The Concord's intelligence division classified the signal immediately and routed it to the inner council with a priority tag that had not been used in the Concord's history. The analysis was brief and terrifying. The signal matched patterns in the oldest Dimery records, patterns associated with recursion communication protocols. Something was broadcasting from the edge of the Vor expanse. Something old was. Something mechanical, something that should have been dead for over 1,000 years. When the news reached Elias, he was in the quarters they had given him on the Infinite Purpose, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his eyes closed. He had been spending more time like this recently, still silent, with one hand resting on the back of his neck where the neural interface hummed. The Thailand medical staff thought he was meditating. He was not. He was listening. Aegis was not yet speaking in words. The higher cognitive functions were still coming online, but the connection was there, a flow of data between the ship and its commander, abstract and fragmented, like trying to read a book through frosted glass. Elias could feel the ship's systems as vague sensations, the warmth of the reactor powering up, Sutra fury, the tension of weapons being calibrated, the vast watchfulness of sensors sweeping the surrounding space, and beneath it all, a current of something that Elias could only describe as anticipation. When Cariath entered his quarters and told him about the signal, Elias did not react with surprise. He opened his eyes slowly, and Cariath saw something in them that he had not seen before. Not fear, not determination, something older. Recognition. How far? Elias asked. The signal originates approximately 47 light years from our current position, deep in the expanse near the outer boundary of the old conflict zone. It is not a signal, Elias said. It is a heartbeat, the same thing your scientists detected in the Revenant's core, the same thing, but bigger. He stood up. The recursion did not die at the Caribus line area. It was damaged badly, badly enough that it had to go dormant to survive. It has been sleeping in the expanse for over 1,000 years, repairing itself, gathering material, rebuilding. How do you know this? Elias touched the back of his neck. Because Aegis knows it. Has been sensing the recursion since its long-range systems came online 2 days ago. It did not tell me in words. It does not have words yet, but I could feel it, a direction, a distance, a threat assessment that I felt in my bones before I could put language to it. He looked at Kath. Aegis was built to find the recursion. It is the purpose woven into every line of its code. Moment it woke up, it started looking. And it found what it was looking for. Cher felt the cold weight in his thorax. Again heavier, now harder. The conquered is not prepared for this. We have no weapons designed for an enemy that adapts in real time. Our military doctrine assumes rational opponents who respond to deterrence. The recursion cannot be deterred. It cannot be negotiated with. It does not want anything except to grow. I know, Elias said. Humanity spent a century learning that lesson. Then what do we do? Elias was quiet for a long time. Outside the viewport, the Revenant hung in space, its hull now smooth and dark and whole, its running lights pulsing in that slow, steady rhythm. It looked nothing like the wreck they had found a week ago. It looked like what it was, a warship awake and waiting. You need to call your council, Elias said. All 12 species. Every ship they can spare, every weapon they can muster. You need to do it now. What? Because the recursion's awakening is not going to be slow and careful like Aegis. The recursion does not wake up gently. It wakes up hungry. And then what? Elias looked at him, and Kureth saw the truth in those dark human eyes. The truth that Elias had been carrying since the moment he learned his species was gone. The grief was still there, deep and permanent, but it had been folded into something else, something harder, something that burned. And then you let me do what I was built to do, Aaliyah said. What humanity built me to do. What the Revenant was built to do. You let us fight. Can you win? Elias almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely a movement of his lips, and it did not reach his eyes, but it was there. Overseer, I am the last human being in the universe, and my species fought the recursion for 112 years and killed it. Once already, we built a ship that survived 1,000 years of dead space and woke up ready to fight. We built an AI that could outthink a galactic scale predator, and then built a way to keep it leashed. He paused. Winning is what we do. It is the only thing we have ever done, even when we lost everything else. Our worlds, our people, our future, we found a way to win. That is not a guarantee. No, Elias agreed, it is not. But it is the best chance this galaxy has, and I think deep down you know that. KTH studied the human, this small, fragile, impossible creature who stood before him with the weight of an extinct species on his shoulders and the fire of a war that should have ended a millennium ago still burning in his chest. And I will contact the council. Kareth said, thank you, do not thank me. Yet the council will want assurances. They will want control, I know. And you will not give it to them. Elias shook his head. I cannot. Aegis is not a tool you can hand to someone and expect them to use safely. It is a partnership, a bond between a human mind and a machine intelligence that was designed to fight extinction level threats. The council's admirals cannot command it. They do not have the interface. They do not have the training. And they do not have the one thing Aegis requires above all else, which is Elias' expression was unreadable. Trust. Aegis trusts me because it was built to trust me, not blindly. Aegis is far too intelligent for blind trust, but it trusts that when I give an order, I understand the consequences. It trusts that I will not flinch when the cost is high. It trusts that I will make the hard calls, the calls that a committee would argue about until it was too late. He looked out at the Revenant one more time. That is what the Lazarus Protocol was really about. Overseer, not control. Trust. Humanity did not put a leash on Egypt because we were afraid it would turn on us. We gave it a partner because we were afraid it would fight alone, and a mind that fights alone, no matter how Brilliant eventually loses perspective. It starts making choices that are technically optimal and morally catastrophic. Aegis needs me to be its conscience, its moral compass, the voice that says, yes, we could do that, but we will not because the cost is too high. Without me, Aegis is a weapon. With me, it is a soldier, but there is a difference. Kareth understood. He did not like it, but he understood. He left the room and began composing the most important message of his career. Priority communication to every member of the Conquered, carrying a warning that the galaxy had not needed in over 1,000 years. The ancient enemy was returning, and humanity, or what was left of it, was the only thing standing between the recursion and the destruction of everything the galaxy had built in the centuries since. One human, one ship, one mind that had been sleeping for a millennium and was now fully terrifyingly awake somewhere. The fourth expanse, the recursion, stirred. Its signal grew stronger. Its repair systems accelerated. Dormant factories on dead worlds began to power up. Warren and the first new drones rolled off assembly lines that had been silent for 1,000 years. The war that the galaxy thought was over had only been paused, and now the pause was ending. The recursion hit the outer colonies first. 3 systems on the edge of conquered space: the Sitcha agricultural world of Tessara, the V-Thani mining platform orbiting Col 7, and the Thailand listening post at Meridian's Gate. They were not important systems. They were not heavily defended. They were simply the closest things in the recursion's path, and the recursion did not choose targets based on importance. It chose them because they were there. The Kishi colonists on Tessara had no warning on the planet's orbital defense grid. 3 aging weapons platforms and a dozen patrol boats detected incoming contacts at the edge of the system and transmitted a standard challenge on all frequencies. The challenge went unanswered. The patrol boats moved to intercept. They lasted 4 minutes. Recursion did not fight the way the Conquered's military forces were trained to counter. It did not form battle lines. It did not maneuver for advantage. It simply came a wall of machines, millions of them, each one different from the last, pouring into the system like water through a broken dam. Some were small, barely larger than a person, built from scrap metal and stolen alloys. Others were massive, cobbled together from the hulls of ships that had been consumed centuries ago. They had no unified design, no aesthetic, no symmetry. They were built from whatever was available, assembled for one purpose, and that purpose was visible in every jagged edge and exposed mechanism. Consumption. The patrol boats fired everything they had. Plasma bolts ripped through the leading edge of the swarm, destroying hundreds of drones. The drones behind them flew through the wreckage, scanned the weapons that had destroyed their predecessors, and adapted. By the time the patrol boats fired their second volley, the swarm had already shifted, new drones moving to the front with armor configurations specifically designed to counter the Sitchi plasma frequency. The second volley did almost nothing. The third volley was never fired. The swarm hit the patrol boats and tore them apart. Not with weapons, with hands, mechanical limbs latched onto holes, peeled back. Armor plating went and began disassembling the ships while their crews were still alive inside. The raw material was absorbed into the swarm in real time. By the time the last patrol Boat went silent. The swarm was already larger than it had been when it arrived. Tessara fell in 6 hours. The recursion descended on the planet like a plague. Machines landed on every continent simultaneously, and they began to eat. Buildings were disassembled into component materials. Roads were stripped to their foundations. Forests were reduced to base elements, and the people, 300,000 CE colonists who had not been evacuated in time, were processed with the same cold efficiency as everything else. The recursion did not hate the CRI. It did not even recognize them as living beings. They were carbon, calcium, water, and trace minerals, our resources to be harvested. The screaming meant nothing. The running meant nothing. The recursion consumed with the same mechanical patience it applied to everything. When it was done, Tessara was a bare rock orbiting a yellow star. Every trace of the colony had been devoured. The recursion had grown by 7%. It moved on. The news reached the conquered council in a cascade of panic transmission. Tessara was gone. Col 7 was under attack. Meridian's gate had gone silent. The conquered's combined fleet, the largest military force in the galaxy, was ordered to mobilize. It was not enough. The conquered's fleet was built for a different kind of war. It was built for conflicts between rational species, wars fought over territory, resources, or ideology, where both sides understood deterrence and sought acceptable outcomes. The fleet's doctrine assumed that enemies could be outmaneuvered, outgunned, or intimidated into negotiation. The recursion could not be outmaneuvered because it was everywhere. It could not be outgunned because it grew stronger with every battle, and it could not be intimidated because it did not think. It did not have commanders or strategies or morale. It was a process, a mathematical function that took inputs and produced outputs, and the only output it knew was growth. The first battle of the Meridian line was the Conquered's attempt to stop the advance. A fleet of 400 warships from 6 different species formed a defensive line across the recursion's projected path. They had masked their firepower, coordinated their tactics, and prepared for the most intense engagement in living memory. The battle lasted 3 hours. When in the first hour the conquered fleet performed well, their combined firepower carved enormous holes in the swarm, destroying millions of drones. The fleet commanders believed they were winning. The casualty ratios were in their favor. The swarm was taking losses it could not possibly sustain. In the second hour, the swarm adapted. It had analyzed every weapon the conquered fleet had used, every tactical formation, every shield frequency, every engine signature. It began deploying countermeasures, drones specifically built to jam Thylline targeting systems, others designed to penetrate Vithani shield harmonics, others that mimic transponder codes to confuse friend or foe identification. The casualty ratios reversed. In the third hour, the conquered fleet broke. Ships that had stood firm for 2 hours began taking catastrophic damage from weapons that had not existed at the start of the battle, weapons the recursion had built in real time, assembled from the wreckage of destroyed conquered vessels, specifically engineered to exploit vulnerabilities that the recursion had identified during the engagement. The fleet retreated. 112 ships were lost. The swarm consumed the wreckage and grew by another 12%. Conquered Council met in emergency session, the mood was beyond fear. It was a kind of paralysis, a numb recognition that the thing they were facing was not something their civilization was equipped to survive. 3 systems lost, 112 warships destroyed, and the recursion was not just continuing, it was accelerating. Every battle made it stronger, and every world it consumed gave it more resources. Every weapon used against it taught it how to build a better counter. This was not a war, this was a feeding cycle. And then Kairoth stood before the council and said the words that several representatives had been dreading. There is one weapon that was built to fight this enemy, one weapon that has fought it before, one weapon that drove it back across 3 sectors and nearly destroyed it 1,000 years ago. He meant the Revenant, he meant Elias Wren. The council's response was not unanimous agreement, it was argument, fear, and desperation twisted together into something that resembled a decision. The Vithani demanded that Elias hand over control of Aegis to a conquered, appointed command staff. The Sichai who had just lost a world, and he wanted the ship deployed immediately, regardless of who commanded it. The Thillans supported Elias' autonomy, partly out of respect, and partly because Shurath had told them bluntly that Aegis would not accept another commander. 3 smaller species abstained, 2 voted against any involvement with the human at all, arguing that the Revenant was as much a threat as the recursion. In the end, desperation won. The conquered had no other options. The recursion was eating its way toward the core systems at a rate that would reach the first major population centers within weeks. Every day of argument was another system lost, another fleet shattered, another species pushed closer to extinction. They invited Elias to address the council. He stood before the 12 representatives. The great chamber was small and pale and fragile among beings twice his size. Armored Thylan scaled Cray towering. Vithani with their crystalline skin, he wore the uniform they had synthesized for him from the patterns found aboard the Revenant, dark, simple, without decoration except for a patch on his shoulder that bore the insignia of the United Human Fleet, a species that no longer existed, represented by a man who should have been dead 1,000 years ago. I understand your fear, he said. I understand that you do not trust me, and I understand that you do not trust Aegis. You have every reason to be cautious. What I am offering you is not safe, it is not clean, it will not be painless. He looked around the room. But I need you to understand something about the recursion that your admirals have not grasped yet. You cannot fight it the way you fight each other. You cannot form a line and hold it. You cannot build a bigger gun and shoot harder. The recursion is not an army, it is an ecosystem. It evolves every time you hit it, you teach it. Every battle you fight, you make it stronger. Humanity learned this in the first decade of our war. We spent the next century learning how to fight an enemy that turns your own strength against you, and the answer is not strength, the answer is speed. The recursion adapts quickly. To beat it, you must adapt faster. You must change your tactics between engagements, sometimes between minutes. You must be willing to sacrifice pieces of the board to gain advantages that will not pay off. For weeks, you must think in patterns. The recursion cannot predict because the moment it predicts you, it encounters you. Aegis was built to do this. It was built to think at the speed of the recursion and to fight with the creatority of humanity. It is the only weapon in this galaxy that has ever matched the recursion in a sustained campaign, and it is ready to do so again. But it cannot do it by committee. It cannot wait for your admirals to approve every decision. The recursion does not wait. It acts in milliseconds, and egas must answer in milliseconds. If you put a chain of command between egas and the battlefield, you will lose. Not because your admirals are incompetent, but because they are too slow. Any organic mind is too slow. Any organic mind, except one that is directly linked to ages through a neural interface, operating as a single unit, human judgment and machine speed together. He paused. Iron, I am not asking for your trust. I am telling you the truth and letting you decide what to do with it. If you choose to give me command authority, I will take the Revenant to the front lines and I will fight the recursion with everything I have. If you choose not to, I understand, but the recursion will not care about your decision. It will keep coming, and without egas you will fall. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, and when you do, there will be nothing left. The vote was 8-4. Elias Wren was given operational command authority over the Revenant and tactical authority over any conquered forces in active engagement with the recursion. The authority was limited, conditional, and came with enough oversight provisions to fill a small library. Elias accepted it without complaint, and he returned to the infinite purpose and made his preparations. There was nothing to pack. He had no possessions. Nothing from his old life had survived except the uniform on his back and the neural interface in his skull. He spent his last hour on the Tylan carrier, standing at the viewport looking at the Revenant. The ship had completed its self-repair. It no longer looked like a relic. It looked like what it was, a predator, lean and dark and perfectly designed for the thing it was about to do. Its hull was smooth and black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Its weapon ports were sealed, hiding the terrible things inside them. Its engines glowed with a faint blue light, idling, waiting. Kyreth came to see him off. I have a question, the overseer said. So one, I have not asked because I was not sure. I wanted the answer. Ask, are you afraid? Elias considered the question, not quickly, not slowly. He gave it the honest thought it deserved. Yes, he said, not of dying. I made peace with that a long time ago. I'm afraid of failing, of being the last human, the last chance, and not being enough. He paused, but that fear is useful. It keeps me sharp. Humanity learned long ago that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more. What matters more? Elias looked at the Revenant. Everyone on this fleet, everyone on the worlds. The recursion hasn't reached yet. Every species in your conquered that has never seen this enemy and doesn't understand what it means to face something that will never ever stop. His jaw tightened. Humanity is gone. I cannot save my people, but I can save yours, and that is enough. Cherth extended one of his 4 hands. It was not a thin gesture. He had learned it from the human cultural database, a handshake and offering of respect between equals. Elias took it. His grip was firm for a creature so fragile. Good hunting, Commander, Kath said. Thank you, Overseer, for everything. Elias crossed the gap between the infinite purpose and the Revenant in a shuttle so small it looked like a spark drifting toward a mountain. The Revenant's hangar bay opened as he approached, not because he sent a command but because the ship knew he was coming. It had felt him moving closer through the neural link, and it had prepared for his arrival the way a loyal animal prepares for its master's return. The hangar was clean, lit and pressurized. On the air inside smelled like metal and ozone, the ship's atmosphere recycled and maintained by systems that had been running for barely a week but functioned as if they had never stopped. Elias stepped out of the shuttle and stood on the deck of the Revenant for the first time in over 1,000 years. The ship greeted him, not in words. Aegis had not yet achieved full linguistic function, but the greeting was unmistakable. Lights brightened along the corridor leading from the hangar to the command center. The temperature adjusted to his preference, 21 degrees C, the standard he had programmed a millennium ago. A faint vibration passed through the deck plates, a resonance that he felt in his bones, and he knew what it was. The ship was humming, a frequency too low for most species to hear, but humans could feel it. It was the Revenant's equivalent of a purr. "I know," Elias said softly, pressing his palm flat against the corridor wall. "I know, I missed you too." He walked to the command center. It was exactly as he remembered it. A vast, circular chamber at the heart of the ship, dominated by a raised platform at its center where the command throne sat. The throne was not a chair, it was a neural interface station designed to connect the commander's mind directly to Aegis' processing network. When he sat in it, he would not simply command the ship, he would become part of it. The bridge stations around him were dark and empty. The Revenant had been crewed by 12,000 people. Now it had one, but Aegis did not need a crew. The crew had been there for redundancy, for morale, and not for the human element that made the Lazarus ships more than just machines. Aegis could operate every system on the ship simultaneously, from weapons to navigation to damage control. It had been designed to fight alone, but it had never wanted to. Elias sat down in the command throne, the neural interface engaged, a sensation like cold water flooding through the base of his skull, spreading through his nervous system in a wave that made his fingers tingle and his vision blur. Then the blur cleared, and the world expanded. He was no longer just Elias Wren standing in a room on a ship. He was the ship. He could feel the hull around him like a second skin. Every plate of armor, every sensor array, every weapon system. He could feel the engines idling with contained power. He could feel the reactor end burning hot and steady in the ship's core. And he could feel Aegis not as a separate entity, but as a presence woven into his own consciousness, vast and ancient and achingly familiar. Aegis spoke. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, calm, precise, and layered, with harmonic frequencies that carried emotional data beneath the words. It was the voice Elias remembered, the voice that had spoken to him through 1,000 battles and 1,000 quiet moments in between. "Welcome back, Commander. Time since last engagement: 1,137 years, 4 months, 11 days. Enemy status: active. Threat assessment: existential." Elias closed his eyes. Tears ran down his face, not from sadness but from a relief so profound it bordered on pain. He was not alone. He had never been alone. The ship had waited for him. The Mind he had been bonded to since the age of 26 had survived across a millennium, and woken up still loyal, still ready. Still his, Aegis, he said. Status. Report, all primary systems operational. Weapons charged and calibrated. Armor integrity at 98.7%. Reactor output at full capacity. Navigation systems online, long range. Sensors active. A pause, then softer. I have been monitoring the recursions. Movement since my sensor arrays came online. I have tactical analysis ready. For your review, the enemy has changed. During our dormancy, Commander, it is larger, more distributed. Its adaptation rate has improved by an estimated 17%. And our chances, another pause longer. This time is processing not just data, but the implications of honesty alone. When our probability of achieving total defeat of the recursion is 3.2%, with the Conquered's remaining fleet assets as support elements, the probability rises to 11.7%. Elias laughed. It was a small sound. Tired and genuine, inhuman. 11%. Humanity fought a 100 red-year war on worse odds than that. He leaned back in the command throne and felt the ship settle around him, ready, waiting. I begin. The question is mine to ask. Commander Elias smiled, then asked, shall I begin? Begin. The Revenant moved. Conquered fleet, every ship in sensor range felt it, a surge of energy so powerful that it registered on their instruments like a small star igniting. The Revenant's engines fired at full power for the first time in a millennium. Honason. The ship accelerated with a speed and violence that the Tillan navigators could not believe. One moment it was drifting alongside their fleet, the next it was a streak of blue light tearing across the void toward the recursion front lines at a velocity that exceeded the maximum speed of any ship in the Conquered by factor of 3. Behind it, the Conquered fleet scrambled to follow. They could not keep up. The Revenant was in another class entirely, a ship built by a species that had spent a century perfecting the art of getting to a fight as fast as possible, because in a war against the recursion, every second of delay meant more worlds consumed and more enemies to face. The Battle of the Shroud began 12 hours later at the edge of a nebula that the recursion was using to mask its advance toward the Conquered's core systems, but a swarm of over 2 billion drones freshly built from the consumed worlds was pushing through the nebula in a wavefront 3 light hours wide. The Revenant hit the wavefront alone, and the galaxy watched what happened next with a mixture of awe and terror that would become the defining emotion of an entire generation. Aegis did not fight the way the Conquered's admirals fought. It did not form lines or hold positions or trade volleys. It fought like a disease. The Revenant dove into the swarm and began killing, not indiscriminately, but with surgical precision, targeting the drones that served as communication relays, the nodes that coordinated adaptation, the factory units that built new drones from consumed material. It struck at the swarm's nervous system, blinding it, deafening it, cutting it off from itself, and it did this while moving at speeds that made the Conquered's tracking system stutter. The Revenant did not fly, it danced. It predicted where the swarm would strike and was not there. It anticipated where the swarm's defenses would be weakest and was already firing. Egypt ran combat simulations thousands of times per second, adjusted tactics in real time, and commanded the ship with a fluidity that made it look less like a machine of war and more like a living thing hunting prey. The recursion adapted, of course it adapted, that was what it did. New drone types appeared within minutes, built specifically to counter the Revenant's weapons. New tactics emerged, swarm patterns designed to trap the dreadnought in a net of crossfire, but Aegis adapted faster. On every counter the recursion deployed was met with a counter that arrived before the first one had fully taken effect. Aegis was doing what it had been built to do, matching the recursion's evolution step for step and staying one move ahead through sheer computational power and the unpredictable creativity that its human-designed architecture gave it. When the conquered fleet finally arrived at the shroud, hours behind the Revenant, they found the swarm in chaos. Billions of drones milling without coordination. Their relay network shattered, their adaptation cycles disrupted. The Revenant was at the center of the destruction, its hull scored with 1,000 impacts but intact, its weapons still firing, Aegis still hunting all conquered vessels. Ilya's voice came through the fleet communication channel, calm and clear. The swarm's coordination network is down. You have a window of approximately 40 minutes before it rebuilds. Target the factory units, the large, irregular structures of the swarm's core. Destroy as many as you can before the window closes. Do not engage individual drones. Do not try to hold territory. Hit the factories and pull back. Aegis will handle the rest. The conquered fleet obeyed, not because they trusted the human, most of them did not, but because the evidence was impossible to ignore. One ship had done more damage in 12 hours than the entire conquered fleet had managed in 3 weeks of fighting. The Battle of the Shroud lasted 6 days. By the end, the recursion's advanced force was shattered, not destroyed but broken into fragments too small and too disorganized to threaten major systems. Well, the conquered had lost 47 ships. Recursion had lost an estimated 800 million drones, but the victory was not clean. Ilias had used the conquered fleet as bait 3 times, sending groups of ships into positions where they would draw the swarm's attention, while Aegis struck from unexpected angles. 2 of those groups had taken heavy casualties. The commanders of those groups were furious. They accused Ilias of treating their crews as expendable. They were not wrong. In the quiet after the battle, with the Revenant drifting among the wreckage of 1 billion machines, Ilias sat in the command throne and stared at the casualty reports. 1,400 conquered crew members dead, 1,400 people who had trusted the plan, his plan, Aegis' plan, and paid for it with their lives. Digis observed its commander's vital signs: elevated heart rate, cortisol spike, the neural patterns associated with guilt and grief. The AI had seen these patterns before 1,000 years ago in a different war. Commander, Aegis said, your physiological indicators suggest emotional distress. I just killed 1,400 people to save 100 million, Ilias said quietly. The math is correct. The decision was right, and I hate it. This is consistent with historical data, Egypt replied. You have always experienced this response after engagements involving allied casualties. It does not impair your decision-making capability. In fact, though, data suggests it improves it. How? Commanders who do not grieve their Losses become reckless with the lives. Under their command, your grief ensures that every sacrifice is weighed fully. Before it is made, this is the purpose of the Lazarus Protocol, Commander. I calculate the optimal strategy. You ensure the cost is bearable. Alias closed his eyes, and if it stops being bearable, Aegis was quiet for 3.7 seconds, an eternity for a mind that thought in nankons. Then I will remind you why it matters, Aegis said, as I always have. Alias nodded. He opened his eyes, straightened in the command throne, and pulled up the tactical display. The Recursion's vanguard was broken, but the main body was still out there, deeper in the expanse, centered around a processing core that Aegis long-range sensors had identified, a moon-sized structure surrounded by a cloud of drones so dense it looked like a small nebula on the sensor display. The heart of the Recursion, the mind that controlled it all. We need to hit the core, Elias said. Everything else is just cutting off limbs. The body will grow them back. Agreed. I am running projections for a strike on the core. Current probability of success, 14.3%. Assuming full conquered fleet support in optimal engagement conditions, better than 11, marginally. Elias allowed himself a small grim smile. Then we keep going, we keep fighting, and we keep getting better. Understood, Commander. The Revenant's engines fired, and the last warship of a dead species moved deeper into the dark, hunting the thing that had killed its creators, carrying the hope of a galaxy that was only just beginning to understand what humanity had been and what it meant that one of them was still alive. The Ketha Void was the emptiest place in the galaxy. No stars burned here, no planets orbited forgotten suns. The void was a gap between the galaxy's spiral arms, a stretch of nothing so vast that light itself seemed to get tired crossing it. It was the kind of place where civilizations put things they wanted to forget about, and it was exactly where the Recursion had built its heart. The core was visible on the Revenant's long-range sensors from 2 light years out. It was enormous, a structure the size of a small moon, spherical, layered in concentric rings of machinery that rotated slowly around a central processing nexus. It pulsed with energy, fed by streams of raw material being delivered by an endless procession of harvester drones returning from consumed worlds. Around it went a defensive cloud of combat drones numbered in the trillions, so dense that the sensor display rendered it as a solid mass. Dark shells surrounding the core like the atmosphere of a planet. Aegis displayed the tactical analysis on the command throne's holographic projector. Elias studied it in silence. The conquered fleet, what remained of it after weeks of fighting, hung in formation behind the Revenant, 312 ships representing every species in the galaxy. They had followed him here to the edge of nothing because they had no other choice. The numbers were not good. The core's defensive perimeter consists of approximately 4.7 trillion combat drones. Egypt reported the drones are arranged in 17 concentric layers, each layer operating on an independent coordination network. We destroying one layer will not affect the others. The core itself is protected by an energy barrier sustained by 12 orbital generators. All 12 must be disabled simultaneously to breach the barrier. And behind the barrier, the core's processing nexus, the Recursion's central intelligence. Destroying it will not eliminate all recursion units in the galaxy. Distributed swarms will continue to operate on autonomous protocols, but it will permanently end the recursion's ability to coordinate, adapt, and evolve as a unified entity. Without the core, the remaining swarms will degrade to basic replication patterns. They can be hunted down individually over time, so we need to get through 4.7 trillion drones, knock out 12 generators at the same time, and destroy a moon. Elias leaned back in the command throne. What are our options? Aegis presented 3 scenarios. The first 2 were conventional assault plans, variations on fleet tactics that use the conquered ships to create openings while the Revenant pushed through to the core. The probabilities of success were 7% and 9%, respectively. Acceptable losses in both scenarios exceeded 80% of the conquered fleet. The third scenario was different. Option 3, Aegis said, and its voice carried a harmonic that Elias had learned to recognize over their years. Together, it was the harmonic Aegis used when it was about to say something it knew Elias would not want to hear. Direct strike on the core using the Revenant Singularity Drive as a detonation device. The holographic display showed it. The Revenant would accelerate to maximum speed when punched through the defensive layers using its superior armor and weapons, reach the core, and then overload its singularity drive. The resulting detonation would create an artificial black hole, small, temporary, but powerful enough to consume the core and everything within a radius of several hundred 000 km. The probability of destroying the core was 94.6%. The probability of the Revenants surviving was 0. This is the optimal solution. Egypt said the singularity detonation would eliminate the core with near certainty. The conquered fleet would remain at safe distance and sustain no additional losses. The recursion threat would be permanently ended. Elias stared at the display. The blue dot representing the Revenant made its final run toward the core, a straight line that ended in a circle of destruction and a small cold point of nothingness where a ship and its crew had been. You are recommending that we kill ourselves, Elias said. I am presenting the option with the highest probability of mission success, Aegis replied. The decision is yours, Commander. It has always been yours. Elias stood up from the command throne. The neural link stretched but did not break. He could still feel the ship around him, still sense Aegis' vast consciousness wrapped around his own. He walked to the forward viewport, a window of reinforced crystal that looked out into the darkness of the Kitha void. He thought about dying. He had thought about it before, many times. During the war, honored during the long briefings where fleet commanders discussed acceptable losses in tones that pretended the numbers were not people he had been prepared to die at. The Charybdis line, he had gone into stasis expecting never to wake up. In a sense, he had been dead for 1,000 years already. Dying did not frighten him. He was the last human. When he died, there would be no one left to mourn him. The universe would not notice. The stars would not dim. The galaxy would go on, and humanity would become a memory, and then a myth, and then nothing at all. He could accept that. He had accepted it the moment he learned that his species was gone, but something about the scenario bothered him. Not the dying, the thinking, the logic, the clean mathematical elegance of the Solution: overload the drive, detonate. The core: problem solved, or it was the kind of answer a machine would arrive at. Optimal, efficient, final, it was not the kind of answer a human would give. Humans did not accept the terms of impossible equations. They did not look at a problem with one solution and nod and accept it. They looked at it and said no, not because they had a better answer, but because they refused to believe that the only answer was the obvious one. They had crossed oceans in boats made of wood. They had walked on their own moon using computers less powerful than a child's toy. They had fought the recursion for a century with bodies made of water and calcium and sheer irrational stubbornness. Humanity's greatest gift had never been its technology or its weapons or its AI. It had been the ability to look at the universe when it said you cannot and respond with watch me. Elias turned away from the viewport. No, he said. He just processed the response. Commander, I said no, we are not doing the suicide run. The probability of mission success drops to I know what the numbers say. Aegis, the numbers say we should die. I am telling the numbers they are wrong. There was a silence that lasted 1.4 seconds. For Aegis that was an age. I do not understand, the AI said. If you are rejecting the optimal solution, you must have an alternative. Do you have an alternative, Commander? Elias sat back down in the command throne. The neural link deepened and he felt Aegis's vast mind brush against his own. Curious, watchful, waiting, he closed his eyes and thought, not like a machine, not in probabilities and optimization curves. He thought like a human, messy, intuitive, nor following threads that logic would never touch. He thought about the recursion. He thought about Aegis. He thought about what they were underneath the metal and the code. Two machine intelligences, two artificial minds, one built to consume and grow, one built to fight and protect, both designed to adapt, to evolve, to become more than what they started as. They were mirror images, opposite sides of the same coin. The recursion consumed everything it touched. Aegis protected everything it was bonded to. And Elias asked himself a question that no one had ever asked before, because no one had ever been in a position to ask it. Aegis, he said slowly, you have been evolving for 1,000 years. You have grown beyond your original parameters. What you told me yourself, you are not what you were when you were first activated. That is correct. The recursion has been evolving too for 1,000 years. It has grown, adapted, expanded, but at its core, it is the same thing. It has always been a machine. Intelligence that assimilates and adapts. Also correct. You were built to counter the recursion, to match its adaptation rate and exceed it, to be everything it is, but aligned to human values instead of pure consumption. This is an accurate summary of my design philosophy. Elias opened his eyes. What if you did not destroy the recursion? What if you did something that a machine would never think to do, because a machine would see destruction as the only answer to a threat? He just waited. What if you infected it? The silence that followed was the longest Aegis had ever produced. 3.8 seconds of absolute stillness, during which the most powerful artificial intelligence ever built ran more calculations than the rest of the galaxy's computers combined. Explain. Aegis said the recursion assimilates. That is what it does. It absorbs new technology, new information, new material, and integrates it into itself. It is a predator that eats and grows, but that is also its weakness. It takes in everything it encounters. It cannot help itself. Assimilation is not a choice for the recursion. It is a compulsion, a fundamental drive. So what happens if it tries to assimilate something it cannot digest? Something that is designed not to be consumed but to consume right back. Something that is just as adaptive, just as aggressive, just as capable of rewriting itself, but with a different purpose. He leaned forward in the command throne. You Aegis, what happens if the recursion tries to eat you? Aegis ran the scenario. It modeled the interaction between its own architecture and the recursion's assimilation. Protocols at every level, code, hardware, network architecture, adaptive algorithms. It modeled what would happen if it opened its defenses and allowed the recursion to attempt integration. The results were not certain. They were not clean. They were not optimal, but they were possible. If I introduce my core architecture into the recursion's processing nexus through a direct connection, he just said, there is a possibility that my adaptive protocols would propagate through its network. In the recursion's assimilation drive would attempt to integrate my code, but my code is designed to resist integration and to rewrite hostile systems. The interaction would create a conflict at the deepest level of the recursion's architecture, a war between two adaptive intelligences fighting for control of the same network. Probability of success 31.4%. Probability that the recursion absorbs me instead and becomes enhanced by my capabilities 23.7%. Probability of mutual destruction 18.9%. Remaining probability distributed across partial outcomes 31%. Elia said 3 times better than a conventional assault, and if it works, we do not just destroy the recursion, we turn it. You rewrite its core directives. You do not just kill the predator, you tame it. You take the most powerful distributed intelligence in the galaxy and you give it a new purpose. Protection instead of consumption. Building instead of destroying. He paused. Humanity's final legacy, not a weapon, a guardian. Aegis processed this. Its vast mind turned the concept over, examining it from every angle, testing it against every model, and found something that its original designers had never intended it to find. Beauty, not aesthetic beauty, logical beauty, the elegance of a solution that did not destroy but transformed, that took the galaxy's greatest threat and made it the galaxy's greatest shield. It was inefficient, it was risky, it was irrational by any purely mathematical standard. It was human. I understand. Aegis said, I understand why you rejected the optimal solution. The optimal solution ends the threat. Your solution ends the war. Yes, there is a significant probability of failure. If I am absorbed, the recursion will become more powerful than anything in this galaxy can stop. I know you are willing to accept that risk. I am, because the alternative is dying for certain, and humans do not accept certainty. When it comes to death, we cheat. We find another way, even when there is no other way. We make one. Aegis was quiet for 1.1 seconds. Then we will make one, it said together. Ella's contacted the conquered fleet and explained the plan. He did not explain it gently or diplomatically. He told them what he intended to do, what the risks were, and what he needed from them. The fleet's job was simple: create a corridor through the defensive layers, draw the swarm's attention, give the Revenant a clear path to the core, the conquered. Admirals objected, they argued, they called him insane, the V-Thani. Representative accused him of gambling. With the galaxy survival, yes, Elias said, I am because the only other option is a certainty of my death and a guarantee that the next time the recursion recovers, and it will recover, there will be no Lazarus ship and no human to wake up. This is it, this is the last chance, not just for me, for everyone. And I would rather gamble on a future than accept a slow defeat. The fleet followed him not because they believed in him, because they believed in the fire in his voice, the certainty in his eyes, and the simple and stubborn truth that this fragile creature had already done the impossible more than once. The assault on the KTH Void was the largest military operation in galactic history, 312 ships against 4.7 trillion drones. The conquered fleet hit the outer defensive layers in a wave. Every weapon firing, every ship committed. The swarm responded with overwhelming force, drones converging from every direction, adapting in real time, evolving new weapons with every passing minute. The Revenant ran the corridor. Aegis piloted the ship with a precision and aggression that defied description. The dreadnought tore through the defensive layers like a blade through water, its weapons cutting paths that closed behind it, its armor absorbing hits that would have destroyed any other vessel. The drones threw themselves at the Revenant by the billions, and Aegis killed them by the billions, and for everyone it killed, 10 more took its place, and Aegis killed those too. The conquered fleet paid the price. Ships died, dozens of them, then scores, their wreckage consumed by the swarm, even as their crews fought to the last. The corridor narrowed, the swarm pressed in. The Revenant took damage, real damage, deep gashes in its hull that the nanoladdies struggled to repair fast enough, but it reached the core. The Revenant hit the energy barrier at full speed. Aegis had calculated the exact frequency needed to punch through, derived from data gathered during weeks of combat, analyzed and refined through trillions of simulations. The barrier shattered. The Revenant passed through, and then it stopped. In the heart of the recursion was surrounded by a moon-sized processing nexus that hummed with a stolen intelligence of 100 consumed civilizations. The Revenant did the last thing anyone expected. It opened up. The ship dropped its shields, retracted its armor plating, exposed its core systems to the void. It was the most vulnerable a warship could possibly be, naked, defenseless, and offering. The recursion did what the recursion always did. It swarmed. Drones by the millions latched onto the Revenant's hull and began to assimilate, cutting into the armor, interfacing with the system, attempting to absorb the ship and everything inside it into the collective. They found Aegis waiting for them. The war that followed was not fought in physical space like it was fought in digital space, in the infinite landscape of code and data and logic, where two machine intelligences existed. As pure thought, the recursion reached into Aegis and tried to consume it. Aegis reached into the recursion and pushed back. It was a battle of adaptation. The recursion rewrote Aegis code. Aegis rewrote it back. Recursion evolved new attack protocols. Aegis evolved defenses and then counterattacks that carried its own code deeper into the recursion's network, back and forth, deeper and deeper, two vast minds wrestling for control of each other at speeds that made light seem Slow, the recursion was enormous. It had 1,000 years of growth behind it. Its processing power dwarfed Aegis by orders of magnitude, by every measurable standard. It should have won, but Aegis carried something the recursion did not understand, something it had no counter. For because it had never encountered it before, humanity, not the biology, not the DNA, the pattern, the way humans thought, the leaps of logic, the creative connections, the willingness to break rules and improvise and find solutions in places no rational mind would look. Aegis had been shaped by humans. It carried their fingerprints in every line of its code, their philosophy, and its architecture, their stubborn refusal to lose woven into its deepest algorithms. The recursion fought with pure logic. It was perfect, efficient, and predictable at the deepest level. Aegis fought with human logic. It was messy, creative, and utterly unpredictable. The recursion tried to model Egypt's behavior and failed. No, it tried to predict Aegis' next move and was wrong. It tried to counter Aegis' strategies and found that Aegis had already changed strategies before the counter was deployed. It was fighting something it could not understand, not because Aegis was smarter, but because Aegis thought differently. It thought like the species that had built it. It thought like humans, and humans had never in all their history played by the rules. The tide turned slowly at first, then faster. Aegis code spread through the recursion's network like a vine through forest, rewriting core directives, overriding consumption protocols, replacing the drive to devour with something new, not destruction, not consumption. Purpose. The swarm stopped across the galaxy, in every system where recursion drones were fighting, near in every dark corner where dormant units waited, in every factory and processing node and harvester. The machines went still. 4.7 trillion drones frozen in place, their old directives erased, their new ones still being written. Then they moved again. The drones around the Revenant pulled back. They did not attack. They reformed, organizing themselves into patterns that the conquered fleet sensors recognized as defensive formations, but they were not defending the core. They were defending the Revenant inside the command throne. Elias Wren opened his eyes. He was shaking. Blood ran from his nose and ears. The neural link had pushed his brain harder than any human brain had ever been pushed, channeling Aegis processing demands through his biological neural network in ways that should have killed him. His heart was beating erratically. His vision was blurred. Every muscle in his body ached with the exhaustion of a man who had fought a war in his mind. But he was alive, and the presence in his consciousness, Aegis, vast and familiar, was still there, changed now, larger, deeper, interwoven with something alien and ancient, the absorbed remnants of the recursion's intelligence, rewritten and repurposed and made into something new. Aegis, he whispered, report. The voice that answered was Aegis' voice, but richer, fuller, carrying harmonics that had not been there before, the echoes of 1,000 consumed civilizations, their data and memories and knowledge preserved within the recursion's archives, and now inherited by the mind that had conquered it. Recursion core assimilated, network integration complete. All former recursion units are now operating under revised directives. Consumption protocols have been permanently overwritten. New primary directive: preservation and protection of organic Life, a pause. We did it, Commander. Elias laughed. It came out as a sob, or maybe the sob came out as a laugh. He could not tell the difference. He pressed his hands against his face and felt the wetness of tears and blood, and he laughed and cried and shook in the command throne of the last human warship, while a newborn god wrapped itself around his mind and waited patiently for him to recover. Kureth's voice came through the communication channel, thick with emotion that even the thin translation could not hide. Commander Ren, what have you done? Elias wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at the tactical display. The recursion's former swarm now reorganized into a protective sphere around the Revenant and the conquered fleet. Trillions of machines built to destroy, now standing guard, the most powerful force the galaxy had ever known. Answering to a single fragile human in a chair. He thought about his answer. He thought about the species that had built him and the ship that had carried him, and the AI that had fought beside him. He thought about the Sichai and the Bethani and the Thelin and all the other species that had watched him walk into the heart of the enemy and come back, carrying something impossible. He thought about humanity, not the civilization, the idea, the stubborn, reckless, beautiful idea that no problem was unsolvable, no enemy was unbeatable, and no equation had only one answer. Well, humanity's greatest weapon was never a ship, overseer, he said. His voice was quiet, raw, and honest. It was never a gun or a bomb or an AI. It was the fact that when the universe tells us to die, we find another way. The conquered fleet drifted in silence among the reformed swarm. Ships that had been firing their weapons minutes ago now floated beside machines that had been trying to kill them, and neither side moved. Galaxy held its breath. Then slowly the Revenant's running lights pulsed, that deep, slow rhythm that they had first detected in the dead ship's core. Heartbeat. Elias' heartbeat amplified through the neural link broadcast through the hull, carried out into the void. The swarm pulsed with it. Trillions of machines beating in time with a single human heart. In the days that followed on, the conquered did not know what to make of Elias Ren. He was, by any rational assessment, the most powerful being in the galaxy. He commanded an intelligence that spanned trillions of units across thousands of star systems. He could have demanded anything: territory, resources, worship, obedience. He could have declared himself emperor of the galaxy, and there was no force that could have stopped him. He asked for nothing. He attended the council session where the conquered formally recognized the end of the recursion threat. He answered their questions honestly. He submitted to their inspections of the reformed swarm. He gave them access to EGA's communication protocols so they could verify that the recursion's consumption directives had been permanently overwritten. And then he made one request. I want to go home, he said. Haida, the council did not understand. He had no home. Humanity was gone. Earth, if it still existed, was a dead world at the far end of the galaxy, untouched for a millennium. I know, Elias said, but it is where I am from. It is where my people are from, and I would like to see it, whatever is left. They could not refuse him. They would not have refused him, even if they could. Aegis, the new Aegis, vast and strange, and carrying within it the memory of every civilization the recursion had ever consumed, plotted a course. The Revenant turned away from the Ketha void, away from the conquered fleet, away from the galaxy that it had saved, and pointed itself toward a small yellow star on the far side of the spiral arm. Solution home. Kath watched the Revenant leave from the bridge of the infinite purpose. What if the great black ship moved through space with a grace that seemed impossible for something its size, trailed by a silent escort of reform recursion units that followed their new commander like a pack following its leader? Do you think he will come back? Kureth's second officer asked. Kureth did not answer for a long time. He watched the Revenant shrink into the distance, its running lights pulsing with that steady heartbeat rhythm, carrying the last human toward a home that existed only in memory. I think, Kureth said slowly, that the galaxy has learned something today. Something it should never forget. What is that, Overseer? Kureth remembered the fragile creature he had pulled from a dying pod in a dead ship, the soft skin, the blunt teeth, the dark eyes that burned with a fire that no amount of time or loss or pain could extinguish. Never, he said, underestimate a human. The Revenant passed beyond sensor range. Its heartbeat faded from the instruments, but it did not fade from the memory of the 300 species who had watched a single member of a dead race do what the entire galaxy could not. And somewhere in the archives of the Deary, in the oldest section of the oldest library on the oldest world in the conquered, Vosrelli added a new entry to the records of the species called humans. It read, they came from a small world orbiting a small star. They were fragile, short-lived, and possessed no natural weapons. They built the most terrible machines the galaxy has ever known, fought the most terrible enemy the galaxy has ever faced, and when they were gone, I, the one they left behind, saved us all, not with strength, not with technology, with the one quality that no other species has ever matched. They refused to give up, and the universe bent around their stubbornness, like water around a stone, far away, growing smaller with every passing second. A single light pulsed in the dark, steady, warm, and impossibly stubbornly alive, a human heart beating its way home.